ku line eyaba bagenda okulonda gwali ku line beera mugumu ojja kuba olonda ne wezinaaba ziweze ssaawa 6 tugenda kuwummuzaamu katono nnyo ate tukomewo mu studio B tubeeko bye tuwayaamu naddala ku muggalo gwa internet oguliwo kati.
Holidays, what a time! Just look. Drama. Drama lives here. Little ones, you never know what they're learning. Choose DSTV today for only 159,000 shillings. Whatever your festive, it's your moment. And this festive season is about to get even more special. The Timeline is brought to you by Choose DSTV today for only 159,000 shillings. Whatever your festive, it's your moment. And this festive season is about to get even more special. The Timeline is brought to you by
You feature to allow you have your latest pictures appear below your composer frame. We'll be telling you about this and more on today's episode of The Timeline. Welcome. My name is Mbifi. But first, Apple introduced its AirPods Max, an innovative wireless headphones that brings together the magic of AirPods into an over-ear piece with high-definition sound. AirPods Max combine a custom acoustic design, H1 chips, and advanced software to power computational audio.
Again, I said I'm not going to continue with campaigning because of what is going on. The running battles between police and opposition. Yes. So I decided to pull out. I could be one of them. So maybe I reached the polling station and they were not observing SOPs, and I decided to go back home. Yeah, but
I think the president will be saying something to the press.
We think he has to say something. Let's hear him.
Voted to use these minutes, 20 minutes, I think, to vote. I congratulate all those who have voted. And let the country be peaceful. Nobody should try to bring violence.
We accept the results.
Of course, if the results are fair, all the government of right.
Even if I'm on
Yes. If there were no mistakes made.
even if I'm on
what you have also been like with the Kuranda, you kukkiriza ebivudde mu kulonda kuwala.
We unprepared. We could have gone prematurely. I don't know. Because up to today, the issue of individual merit still stands out, even within the multi-party dispensation. Because we have had people voting for a person not because he is a member of his political party, but either is a relative, is his friend, is his something other than the political party. And we have had people in the political parties also sometimes behaving like they want to make that as a claim, as an entitlement, because this one. There was this saga where this lady, Mama Mabira, went and stood and wanted to be the flag bearer. But there's this friction. People are saying, for you who has just joined the church, you cannot be a Sama Christo. Because for us who have been here in this movement for long, and for you have been in FDC,
you've actually been fighting us.
Exactly. Now you join, and then you want to become a flag So there are also those issues in some of the political parties. But at the same time, I think the political parties are not the leaderships of the various political parties other than the movement, because the movement has tried as much as possible to have structures from the village up to the national level. And sometimes that's why the opposition have been claiming that the system, the movement system has fused itself on government structures, and they are using that to have advantage of the rest. But the problem has been with the opposition itself. They have not had time, even after the elections, to go down to organize themselves, to organize the structures, so that you have, and to me, you remember one of the issues that Muntu was raising when he was in FDC, was saying, look, we are not going to be able to win the election in this country, to take the presidency, unless we have built structures from the grassroots up to the national level. And I think he was right, because without that, we're already hearing of polling stations without agents. We have constituencies without candidates. We have going unopposed because there's no anyone standing against them. And as we speak, I think we already have 15.
Over 15.
Yes.
16.
Who have gone unopposed, and they're only from the movement. So you realize that the political parties have not been able to take root, even under the multi-party dispensation. They're still lacking. That needs to connect the community and the political leadership.
Yes, I call. In Tanzania, there's what they call Chama cha Baba. There's that. And if anybody is CCM, they are CCM. Here, it's really not that your political parties where somebody says I have these sentiments for the leader of the party, but yet I do not want X, Y, or Z. Mututa here has talked about us going into multi-party dispensation, whether not ready or whether prematurely. But I would imagine that even if it is just a marriage, that you started marriage and you're possibly not ready for that marriage. But 15 years in that marriage, you can't say I have not learned anything in this marriage. I yet do not know how to behave like a husband in a home or a wife in a home. I think even when you start a marriage, when you're not prepared, but along the way, you learn to appreciate and learn to do certain things. Why aren't we learning these things? And we keep talking about, apologizing to ourselves for possibly having done this thing when we were not ready for it, or otherwise. What do you think could be the problem?
Now, this particular election actually has proved to us that there is everything wrong with our multi-party system, where you have more than 50% of the candidates at every level being independents. At presidential level, more than 50% are independents. Actually, we just have 5 who are representing parties.
More candidates than parties.
Yes, independents. So at parliamentary, it's actually the same thing. So this shows that there's something.
At parliamentary, you have about 1,030 plus independents.
Yes.
At parliament.
Yes, actually, they constitute more than 50%. So this
because they're more than NRM,
they're more than NRM, they are more than the rest. So this shows.
Have been a political party.
Yes, actually. It would be the massive party. So it therefore means there is something fundamentally wrong with our multi-party system. Because under normal circumstances, if somebody is denied a card in NRM or he has lost the primaries and they insist on coming, they defect to another party. That is under normal circumstances. But where somebody opts to come as an independent, it therefore, because it has 2 implications. That one, they've lost faith in parties, but also secondly, that perhaps in that particular constituency, that particular party is strong, that you can either come on the ticket of that party or as an independent, but seemingly leaning to that particular party. So this, I think, goes back to the mass party, that NRM, that after elections, they should come up with a system, a criteria where that will pick their candidates, their flag bearers, because ideally about 50% of the candidates who are independent actually participated in the NRM primaries, so implying that they were not satisfied with the outcome. But also, it goes back to monetized elections. Yes, monetized election. This time and more than ever before, actually, elections have been monetized. In some constituencies, if you don't have 500 millions and above, you don't even dream of becoming a member of parliament. So, which is actually very, very, very dangerous. Yeah.
I just put it here. I call it the cost of politics in this country. What do you think are the drivers for this cost of the cost of politics in this country? When you come to parliamentary level, when you go to local governments, when you go to presidency, the cost of contesting for an elected position in this country is very hefty. What do you think are the drivers that have led us to this way, and we don't seem to actually now revert from this position anytime sooner?
I think one of the drivers are the politicians themselves. That the other day you voted a call, he didn't have a house, but after 5 years he's building a mansion and he has a fleet of cars. So you are showing that now it's a lucrative business that really now, that is the whole thing. So the politicians have not set good examples, that instead of bringing projects home, they come when they actually change it. That is one thing. That you vote a call, the other time the children were going to a UPE school, now they've been he shifts the children to an international school. So I think it is the politicians who have not done it. But also, it's because of globalization. Because everywhere now, elections are very expensive. You go to the US, you go to Kenya, you go to South Africa, you go to Nigeria, elections are very expensive. Let me give this simple analysis. That yesterday we calculated that you need at least 71,000 polling agents if you're presidential candidate. Now, on average, you'll get like 10,000 for their lunch because they're not going to stay there minus eating. Maybe you need 5,000 for each, for their airtime. That is 15,000. So multiply. So that means even on a polling day, as a presidential candidate, you need not less than 3 billions if you're to have an agent or at least 2 agents at each polling station. So I mean that also makes the whole exercise very expensive.
Okay, would we, if we were clear on ideology, would it be any better? But because I think lack of ideology is one of those. When we went into politics, especially of multi-party dispensation, you will notice that the ideology. Now, you may not have the right ideology, but when you have the ideology, do you think that if we didn't lack ideology, it would be a little better? As opposed to, because we actually think that one of the drivers of the cost of politics in this country is lack of ideology. What do you think, Ndugu Mtuta?
Yeah, that's one of them. But also knowing that for why it has become so monetized, especially now, the electorate also is a problem. Because if a person is going, because I've heard people say, he talks very well, but
he doesn't have money.
Exactly. Now, the political parties, also political actors, if the political parties were strong enough and they were in control of their people, in other words, you are talking about ideology, all these political parties don't have anything different from the other. Of course, you are now hearing about slogans. Well, in most cases, most of these political parties are being related with slogans. A new Uganda, securing your future,
building a new
Uganda. We are knowing them for that. But when you go down and dissect this political party, what do they intend to do for Ugandans in the next 5 years? When you look at their manifestos, I've never, by the way, seen some of those manifestos because I've been trying to check if they have those.
Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has moved to reassure voters of their security at the polling stations, accusing opposition leaders of trying to intimidate voters. Museveni says that Ugandan army has been deployed to ensure security for voters. Here is what he had to say.
I call upon all registered voters to come out and vote. There have been practices of intimidation where especially the opposition people have been threatening people not to come out and vote. In some areas, they have even attacked peaceful citizens. I held a meeting with the security forces. They are ready to defend you. Therefore, don't fear anything. Come out and vote. Nobody will intimidate you. Nobody will attack you. If anybody tries to do that, we shall get him or her. The security forces, following the law, are ready to deal with any troublemaker. Therefore, do not be tempted to break the law. Therefore, I am warning everybody, please do not try to cheat. I'm glad the Electoral Commission has finally brought a system which is foolproof. This is the one where you can only vote if you show your fingerprint. Ugandans, be confident, we have everything. Our economy is strong, the army is strong and experienced, the population are well organized. Go out and vote. Nobody will intimidate you. If anybody tries to do that, we shall deal with him or her.
All right, and that's what President Yoweri Museveni had to say as we get closer to the polls, which are going to be taking place tomorrow. We are now joined by Jackie Kemigisa, who is joining us from Kampala, Uganda, Kampala, and she's going to be just giving us insight of what is going on, what's on the ground. Yesterday, we saw a heavy deployment of military and disciplined forces in Uganda, especially in the capital, and some say that that was a sign or a message being sent to Ugandans, a message of intimidation. We'll hear from her what the current situation is. And just to give you a background, President Yoweri Museveni has been at the helm and the president of Uganda for 34 years. He is going for another term. One of the things that, of course, has had to happen in his tenure is a change of constitution to change the age limit. He would not have qualified should the constitution have stayed as it was. So these are seen as ways that he has used to stay in power. According to him, he believes the strongest contender, Bobi Wine, is a project of foreign interest, what he calls the Western world, and he believes that he is being sponsored, Bobi Wine that is being sponsored by the Western world to push a Western agenda. The question that has often come up, of course, is that of homosexuality, which he stands and says that there is tolerance in Uganda. However, it is not a way of life that they are going to institutionalize, and that is what would some of the areas that we'd like to cover as we have this conversation. We do now have Jackie Kemigisa, who's joining us from Kampala, Uganda. Jackie, thank you for joining us. Ugamba Chi, if she can hear me. Jackie, hopefully you can hear me, joining us from Uganda. Good morning, Jackie. All right, we seem to be having a technical issue which we are going to sort out. Remember, you're welcome to participate in this conversation as we continue. And of course, Uganda being a neighboring country to Kenya, we certainly have a lot of interest to keep an eye and see what happens. Even the East African community, one of the things we'd like to find out is what role they would have to play to ensure that there is peaceful transition in Uganda and that democracy holds its place. So maybe, Jackie, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us this morning. And we've just heard from the President, Yoweri Museveni, saying that voters should not be afraid to come out and vote. The military has been put out to ensure safety. Would you agree that that's the case? Or would you go with a narrative that some have said it is a sign of intimidation from the authorities?
I think that I would go with the narrative that it is indeed a sign of intimidation. First of all, we can look at the symbolism that the president is already putting out there. And he's addressing the country wearing a yellow shirt that represents his color, but at the same time, he has on a military jacket. But that very speech also comes at a time when yesterday, Ugandan military helicopters flying over the city. We had armored vehicles all over town. You had army officers, police on foot in lines. You would actually mistake if you didn't know that Uganda was at war. But also, previously, we've seen how security officials have handled the election, but also have handled protests. So, for example, in the November murders, when over 50 Ugandans died. So there's already a precedent that the military and security officials, whether it is in their treatment of journalists, we've seen how journalists have been targeted, both international and national, by security forces. But also recently, the chief of police in the case of Uganda was out there on national television telling journalists that they are ready to beat them to bring them back in line.
Right.
So what the president is saying versus what is on ground are two separate things. For
all right. So maybe just to get a feel of what the situation is today, we saw that heavy deployment of security forces, and there were those that you've mentioned say that this was a sign of intimidation, so to speak, like a message, a subtle message being sent to Ugandans that do not dare do anything that is viewed, quote unquote, to be against the law. But what is the situation today? Do we have people who possibly are still going about their business? Voting starts tomorrow. What's the current situation in Uganda?
I think people are, because again, you have to understand that if you were here, for example, I covered the 2016 election, nothing was different. We still had army, we still had violence, so you have a regime that has been in power for over 30 years, and majority of those years many have witnessed violence. For example, my generation that is born after Museveni has come into power. We don't know anything outside of Museveni. So again, to an outsider, it might look like, well, this is very, very scary. But because Ugandans have been conditioned to expect so little, that even these scenes of violence have been normalized. But at the same time also, there have been media reports of people moving their families up country and leaving urban centers that are mostly the opposition strongholds.
All right, and let's bring in now the question of Bobi Wine, who seems to be the strongest contender against Yoweri Museveni. Your thoughts on his ideology? He calls himself the ghetto president. What are your thoughts on his ideology and whether this resonates with Ugandans?
I think that his ideology does resonate with many Ugandans and many Ugandans of a certain age group. And I think that to put it into perspective, Bobi Wine is just half the age of President Museveni, but also Uganda's median age is 16. So you have more than half the population that is below 30 that does identify with one, Bobi Wine as an individual being quote unquote self-made, raised in not really absolute poverty, but poverty as well. So you have many Ugandans who one can relate to him via messaging, via experience, but also via age category. So I think that he's appealing to that kind of section of Ugandans.
Mm-hmm.
Whether those Ugandans can vote or are registered to vote, that's a whole different conversation.
All right. And in terms of the youth support for Bobby Wine, it is one thing to win, and he seems to have a lot of support with the youth just by virtue of the fact that he is younger. They probably can relate to him in a better way than Museveni, who suppose at age is 76. But he would also need to appeal to the older generation, the decision makers, so to speak. Does he have any appeal to those who possibly are of an older generation, or is he purely relying and depending on the youth vote?
I think he does have a slight appeal, but also I think that in the context of, and I don't want to be very dismissive of Bobby Wine as well,
Mm-hmm.
but in the context of age-wise, but also experience-wise. So, for example, my parents and that older generation have experienced Idi Amin, other different atrocities that have been committed. And for the longest time, Museveni's campaign has been around bringing peace. And even his subtle reminders that are in form of warnings is, we'll vote NRM for peace. So just that kind of intimidation and piling on the trauma that that generation has experienced, but also experiences that they have, I think would be shared with our generation as well, given how young people have been disappearing, people shot dead on the streets, in their cars. So there is still that attachment to Museveni as a politician, but also Museveni as this image of peace for an older generation. So given the voter turnout in terms of those who have been coming to Bobby Wine's rallies and versus those who have been to Museveni, even though most of them have been younger people, but you see that there is an older generation that mainly does shift to Museveni's side. So I think that the president still has a strong hold in those areas.
All right, and Jackie, I'm going to request that you take a short break, but we'll come back with you. When we come back, let's also look at Museveni's ideology. He is promising stability, and he says he represents change, and that the people of Uganda are the ones who want him to stay at the helm. We'll start from there. So we take a short break right here on Morning Express. Do stay with us if you can.
This is KTN News. Go ahead is believing to make each day a brighter day.